For centuries, power was a spectacle. A king on a golden throne, a general on the march, a dictator with a clenched fist and loudspeakers blaring. Power was loud, visible, theatrical. It insisted on being feared. To be obeyed, it had to shout. And more often than not, it was obeyed precisely because of that. Violence was the signature of power. People knew who was in charge, they knew where power was, and they knew what happened to those who dared to challenge it. But something changed. Today, you wake up, pick up your cell phone, and you're already in gear. No one yelled at you, no one forced you, but you obey. You dress the way you're expected. You work for what you've been conditioned to want. You act within the lines of an invisible script, and you sincerely believe that you're choosing. Power now has a different face. It doesn't impose, it convinces. It doesn't pressure, it suggests, and you, without realizing it, are kneeling before it every day. Max Weber, one of the greatest sociologists in history, explained that power is not just imposition. It is also legitimacy. You do not obey out of fear. You obey because you believe you must, because on some level, you have been convinced that it is right, necessary, natural. And when power reaches this stage, the stage of silent acceptance, it becomes almost indestructible, because it no longer needs to impose itself. It just whispers, and you get the message. We live in a time when shouting has become suspect. Those who shout are ignored and ridiculed. The new power is elegant, silent, digital. It comes in the form of algorithms, contracts, public policies, slogans. It infiltrates your beliefs, your desires, your decisions. There is no authoritarian voice. There are well-positioned suggestions. There are gentle warnings, blue icons, friendly alerts, and you adapt without anyone having to raise their voice. The scream scares, the whisper seduces. The scream imposes, the whisper shapes. And between fright and enchantment, modern society has chosen to obey the low tone, the subtle gesture, the technical discourse that seems neutral, but is not. Today, power dresses itself in care. It presents itself as a solution. And if you don't pay attention, you can spend your whole life being controlled, thinking you are just following what is best for you. The throne has been replaced by an interface, the crown by a badge, the shout by a notification, and yet the dominance remains. The authority still exists, only now it doesn't have to remind you of it anymore. It just smiles, and you say, "Yes, sir." From an early age, you learn to obey. As a child, obedience came out of fear of punishment. At school, out of fear of a bad grade. At home, out of fear of disappointing. And little by little, obedience stopped feeling like fear. It started feeling like morality, maturity, responsibility. But what no one told you is that, in this process, a part of you was trained to keep quiet, to not question, to accept rules that you did not choose. The system did not force you with shouts. It shaped you with rewards, validations, empty prizes. And you, without realizing it, adapted to what was expected of you. Max Weber called this rational legal authority, the kind that imposes itself through institutions, laws, bureaucratic structures. You obey not because you believe in the person, but because of the position they occupy, the badge, the robe, the signature. The power is in the paper, in the system. There is no charisma, there is no tradition, just a set of gears that turns independently of who is in charge. And the more complex the structure, the harder it is to identify where the order comes from. That's when power becomes invisible. No one needs to threaten you anymore. The fear of failure, shame, and cancellation is enough. The system has become more sophisticated. It has adapted to a world that values the appearance of freedom. Today, we are invited to choose, but within a carefully designed box. We have the feeling of autonomy, but it is an autonomy with borders, with limits, with surveillance. Shouting is no longer necessary when the individual becomes his own jailer. And the most dangerous thing, the whisper, doesn't seem like an enemy. It seems like a friend, an advisor, a smiling coach, a voice that says, "You need to reinvent yourself. You need to improve yourself. You need to be more productive." And you run. You demand it of yourself. You blame yourself. Because now power no longer needs to punish you. It teaches you to punish yourself. It trains you to blame yourself for not being enough, for not delivering, for not living up to expectations. And the most impressive thing, it does this in the name of success, self-love, and evolution. You post a photo, you hope for approval, you get likes, and you feel validated. But who dictated the rules of what is admirable? Who decided what is successful, beautiful, intelligent? The answer is, no one shouted it, but someone, somewhere, whispered it. And the whisper spread like wind. It entered through screens, through headphones, through inspirational speeches. It became a collective belief, and you began to chase something you never decided to want. You just learned that you should. The most effective power is not the one that dominates you. It's the one that makes you want exactly what it wants. It's the one that convinces you that you're in control, when in fact, you're just following a carefully written script, written by voices that don't shout, but that know exactly how to make you bow your head. With grace, with sweetness, with conviction. It's no longer about imposing limits on yourself with iron fences or shouting orders in public squares. Today, power hides in the words you use, in the hashtags you repeat, in the slogans you think you chose to love. The new power disguises itself as a trend, masquerading as innovation. And the more modern it seems, the more invisible its domination becomes. Max Weber said that every form of domination needs a certain kind of justification, a reason that makes it seem natural, legitimate, necessary. What has changed is that today this justification no longer needs to come from written laws or religious dogmas. It comes from something much more subtle: consensus, the silent majority, the algorithm that shapes collective behavior. And that is exactly where the danger lies. Because you do not obey a tyrant. You adapt to the group. You keep quiet so as not to stand out. You mold yourself so as to be accepted. Think about it. When was the last time you had an opinion that wasn't in vogue, that you went against the grain and weren't immediately tempted to back down? The new power knows it doesn't need to censor you directly. It can just isolate you, silence your reach, reduce your relevance, leave you talking to no one, and you, without an audience, learn to keep quiet on your own. Not out of physical fear, but out of fear of being forgotten, ignored, disconnected. This type of obedience is deeper. Because it doesn't come from outside, it's born within. You start to censor yourself, to review what you think, to measure your words before you even say them. And the most disturbing thing, you start to think that this is evolution, that it's maturity, that it's empathy. But many times, it's just conditioning. It's the result of a power that no longer needs to order. It only needs to suggest, lightly, sweetly, with a touch of common sense that has been carefully implanted in your belief system. You consume content every day. You choose brands, ideas, gurus, mantras. But were these choices born in you, or were they slowly planted until they seemed natural? Power doesn't shout today because it doesn't need to. It made you want what it needs you to want. It put the leash on you, and then taught you to love it, to show it off, to make it part of your identity. This is the most sophisticated power, the one that acts without being noticed, the one that presents itself as freedom, but keeps you trapped in invisible expectations, the one that makes you obey, smiling, believing that you are in control, that you are being authentic, when in fact you are just repeating, with pride, everything that someone whispered in your ear. The great trap of subtle power is precisely the feeling that it does not exist. You live believing that you are free, that your choices are authentic, that your voice has weight. But behind this confidence, there is a sophisticated engineering shaping desires, opinions, habits, and even silences. What Weber already anticipated is that modern power, when institutionalized and rationalized, would no longer be felt as oppression. It would become part of the air we breathe. You no longer see grids. You see goals. You don't see chains. You see contracts. You don't listen to orders. You listen to metrics, graphs, data. Everything is so logical, so objective, so unquestionable. After all, who would oppose science, reason, progress? But what no one realizes is that even logic can be instrumentalized. Even data can be molded. And so, power continues to dictate the rules, without raising its voice, without needing to justify, because it has already become the norm. It has already been internalized. Obedience then stops looking like submission. It starts to be interpreted as competence, discipline, alignment. You are praised for going with the flow, for not creating friction, for knowing how to play the game. And the game, of course, was created by those who master the rules. And since every good player wants to win, they don't question the board. They just run harder, they try harder, and they demand more of themselves when they fail. It is the triumph of control disguised as meritocracy. In this scenario, disobedience does not need to be punished harshly. It is enough to label it as failure, as backwardness, as madness. The rebel is dismissed with irony. The critical thinker is set aside as someone negative, complicated, problematic. And collective silence takes care of doing the rest of the work. It is no longer the state that keeps silent. It is the group. It is the culture. It is the fear of being left behind. And when everyone is afraid to think differently, power has won. Because it has created a field where criticism is seen as a threat and conformity as a virtue. And worse, it has achieved this without spilling blood, without enacting authoritarian laws, without armies on the streets. Only with well-formed speeches, with structures that promise security, stability, and belonging. The new power has understood that it no longer needs to control directly. It just needs to convince you that being controlled is part of the game. This is the whisper that Weber did not fully hear, but anticipated with frightening precision. Charismatic domination, traditional domination, legal domination, all converge toward a new form. Consensual, almost unconscious domination. Domination that spreads as culture, as norm, as common sense. And once the common sense takes hold, anyone who dares to disagree seems crazy. Or worse, seems dangerous. Today's obedience is not forced, it is desired. That is why it becomes so difficult to realize when one is being manipulated. The power that screams, you recognize, fight, and defend yourself. The power that whispers merges with your desires. It speaks with your language, enters you as a choice, but acts as an imposition. It convinces you that you want what, in fact, you were taught to want. Max Weber showed us that all domination needs to be sustained by beliefs. And what we have today is a system that produces beliefs on an industrial scale. Belief in productivity as the supreme value. Belief in self-image as truth. Belief in obedience as emotional intelligence. Belief in silence as maturity. And so, the more you believe, the more you surrender. And the more you surrender, the more you lose the axis from which you began to move away. Freedom, in this context, is no longer the absence of chains. It is the ability to realize that even the words freedom, authenticity, empowerment can be packaged, sold, marketed, and used to keep you exactly where you are. Obeying, with pride, with passion, with hashtags. You think you are choosing, but your will has already been shaped before you even ask yourself what you really want. There is, however, a way out, but it begins with an intimate disobedience, a silent refusal. Not against people, not against institutions, but against the illusion that everything is natural, neutral, inevitable. You need to relearn how to ask questions, to distrust consensus, to observe where your desire ends and the desire of others in you begins. You need to have the courage to displease, to be inconsistent, to fail to meet standards, to recover that which has not yet been completely conditioned, your conscience. Because whispering only has power where there is distraction. Control only prevails where thought is comfortable. The system only wins when you forget that you can get out of it. And perhaps this is the greatest silent revolution that anyone can make. Not shouting, but also not obeying, just waking up. In the end, Weber was right. Modern domination is rational, organized, seductive, but it still depends on one thing that only you can give: consent. And maybe it's time to say no, to refuse the sweet invitation of conformity, to break the cycle of elegant obedience. Because true power, the one that sets you free, doesn't shout, but it doesn't seduce you either. It just brings you back to yourself. If this reflection made you rethink what power, freedom, and choice are, leave a like. It shows that there are still awakened minds in this silent system. And subscribe to the channel, because here we don't shout, but we also don't obey without thinking. The next question may be the one that turns the tide for you.